the Carney by Daniel Howard.
Are we doing a different name each episode?
Maybe.
I like it. These can get really, really creative. All right. Welcome, everybody, to I'll Drink to Fact, a true story versus Hollywood podcast. Tonight, we are taking on the movie Winchester, which is based on the true story of the Winchester Mystery House.
It sure is. What you got in your cup?
Oh, I don't know. I just concocted a cocktail.
A concoctail?
A concoctail, if you may. It has peach vodka, a little Satsuma rum, some pina colada mix, and a little sweet and sour, with some maraschino cherries.
And before you mixed it up, you layered the pina colada mix, did your little shaky with the rum and vodka and all that good stuff, and then slowly poured it on top of the pina colada mix, and then added your splash of like maraschino juice, and it kind of looked like a candy corn. So
right.
I think it's a candy corn cocktail.
If it tasted like one,
Yeah.
True, but it does taste like a dreamsicle.
Oh, does it?
Yeah, it's pretty tasty.
Cool.
Yeah. What are you drinking over there? That fancy looking can. Ooh, that was special.
Yep. Got my frosty glass. I am drinking Black-O-Lantern.
Black-O-Lantern.
By Wasatch Brewery out of Utah. It's the first week of September, and I'm already giving in to pumpkin spice. This is a pumpkin stout brewed with pumpkin and spices. So I'm really excited to try this.
Delicious.
And I love dark beers and warm fall spices.
I do just want to note that Black-O-Lantern does sound like a great black exploitation horror movie crossover.
That's really good. You should try some. It's really smooth.
I will gladly try this in our NOLA cup that we got.
Yeah.
Glass.
Goblet.
Interchangeable. Oh, that's good.
Super smooth.
Super smooth.
Can I try your drink now?
Yeah, absolutely. Here you go.
You know, that's not bad.
It's not. It's
Because I don't like creamsicle. I don't like orange and cream.
right.
But because it's like orange and peach and coconut,
Right.
it's really good.
And it's Satsuma. It's not orange, so it's a little more nuanced.
That's true.
All right, so we are getting into Winchester, the movie. The rated PG-13 horror movie, which has definitely been a trend as of late that I'm not sure I'm very happy with.
The what trend?
Rated PG-13 horror movies.
Oh, I guess I didn't even think about that, what it was rated. We had talked about rating with Carla, but yeah, not really with this one.
Right, and ever since we talked about that, I was like, oh, maybe I need to start looking at the ratings. I'll look at the budget and everything on these. But no, with horror movies, I don't know. You know me, I like the gory horror movies. So to me, if it's PG-13, then there's not a lot of blood and violence. Whereas like you like the more psychological, supernatural stuff, and you can pull those off with the PG-13 as long as the ghost doesn't pop out yelling like "fuck you, motherfuckers" or anything.
The swearing ghost.
Right.
Got it.
Swearing ghosts, which should also be in a movie. The swearing ghost.
Helen Mirren had a pretty funny swearing moment in this one that always makes me laugh because I'm like, Helen Mirren had to say that.
Helen Mirren says this fucking whore must die or something like that.
This whore bitch has to die.
Yeah, this whore bitch has to die. Yes.
That just happened.
Yes.
Just funny.
So anyway, we'll get into it here. We're talking about Winchester for the third time. It was released February 2nd, 2018. It has a runtime of 1 hour and 40 minutes. It was directed by the Spierig brothers. It was also written by Tom Vaughn and the Spierig brothers. It's starring Helen Mirren and Jason Clarke. and the budget is $3.5 million. Box office I showed that it made 41.
Wow, their budget was only $3.5 million. I think that's really low.
Well, I mean, besides the like exterior shots of the house, most everything in it could have been on a studio stage set.
Definitely.
So,
But I just felt like there were a lot of like CGI.
not entirely. I mean, we'll get into it and talk about some of the like ghosts and jump scares and stuff like that. And I felt like a lot of the ghosts were real people. There wasn't a lot of CGI to it. I mean, like I said, we'll get into it. So as the movie starts up, we're treated to a big black screen with red letters that says "Inspired by actual events," which is our job to prove if that's true or not. So it opens up, says San Jose, California, 1906. We get an overview of this like massive structure of a house with all of these construction sounds going on. Then we go to the interior. There's a close-up of 2 stained glass windows. One says the same thoughts, people of this little world, and the other says wide unclasp the tables of their thoughts. Then we go to a wide shot of a figure dressed in all black floating down a breezeway. There's several cuts from inside the house with the construction sound being overlapped with like a kind of spooky reverb on it, and just kind of showing the massive interior of this house is what I feel like they were trying to do.
One thing I liked with the construction sounds, they almost made it seem like the spooky like pounding on a door, like you almost didn't know, oh, is that someone like knocking at a door or scraping at the floorboards? And it was like, nope, that's just construction sound. So I kind of like that play on spooky paranormal versus reality.
That's kind of cool. Yeah, I didn't think about that. So after we kind of get all of our shots of the inside of the house, we focus in on our first scene. It's a redheaded boy awakens and he hears this ghostly singing coming from outside the room. And then some bells ring, middle of the night. Then we cut back and see his mother wake up and the boy's no longer there. She walks out into the hallway and sees the boy creepily standing at the end of the hallway with a burlap sack over his head. As his mother approaches, he starts to walk away. She starts following him down a hallway, gets to a set of stairs where he stops. She takes off the burlap sack and he just has like whited out eyes.
Like glaucoma, like that milky white.
Yeah, but to the extreme, because I mean, there was like no pupils, no corneas, no nothing.
Right.
The boy points to these stairs that are leading straight up into a ceiling and just says, "He's coming for us." End scene. So next scene, San Francisco, California. Supposed to assume, I guess, it's the same year. They don't really tell us. We find 2 people taking laudanum, which is an opioid tincture used at the time for medication or for, a little recreational fun, it seems like. Mm-hmm. The 2 people taking laudanum are, who we find out later is Dr. Eric Price and a woman who appears to be a lady of the night. There are 2 more women dancing in the background. The man starts talking to her about fear and performs a magic trick.
Using a dollar bill.
As he's performing this magic trick and talking about fear being only in your mind, there's a knock at the door. As he's leading his ladies of the night out, he greets a man named Arthur Gates, who introduces himself as the chief legal officer for the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. He presents Dr. Price with a job opportunity. He explains that Mrs. Winchester was left the majority share of the Winchester Company after her husband, William Winchester, passed. So she controls 51% of the share. She also then lost their daughter, Annie. It doesn't specify when, though, so I don't know if it was the same time, if it was later that year, if it was many years later. He then says that she turned to a spiritual advisor at this point and then moved across the country to San Jose, California. She bought what was at the time an 8-room house and started construction on it almost immediately. It has around-the-clock construction and has become a gargantuan 7-story structure. It's just a maze of walls and stairs. At this point, he says the board of directors has enacted its right to question her sanity with the controlling share, especially since I guess she's blowing a lot of money on these construction and everything. I think that was all part of what she was left behind, though.
Yes, I'll get into the details.
Okay. He then explains that Sarah Winchester has invited Dr. Price to stay at the mansion for the duration of his examination and that they will pay him handsomely. So then we cut to Dr. Price arriving at the mansion. It's obviously construction going on since construction has not ceased and will not cease. The butler who sees Dr. Price in explains that the construction occurs day and night and that today is a busy day for construction, which I found to be funny because if people are just always there building. How is it a busier day than normal?
Right. I don't remember. Did he elaborate as to why it was
he
a
was just like,
quote-unquote busy
today's
day?
a busy day for construction.
Today and every day.
Right. So anyway, there's a shot of the foreman awkwardly holding a blueprint, like he's sharing it with somebody, even though there's nobody there, and it was just sharing it with us as the
What?
audience. Yeah, it was really, really odd.
I thought
feel
you were
like it could
gonna.
have been accomplished in a less obvious way, but yeah, he's like holding it out to the side of his body, like he's showing it to somebody, but there's nobody there. It was just so
Gotcha.
the camera could zoom in on it.
I thought you were gonna say, like he was sharing it with a ghost.
He may have been, for all I know. Maybe that's what they were getting at, but
Maybe.
the camera zoom definitely did not make me feel like that.
Okay.
Maybe if the camera zoomed in, then went around an invisible body. But. So anyway, after that awkward shot, Dr. Price is led to Mrs. Winchester's office. There he meets the boy's mother from earlier, and she introduces herself as Marion Marriott, Mrs. Winchester's niece, who would make the boy from earlier, Henry Marriott, her great nephew. So there's some conversation back and forth about the expectation of his behavior during the visit, his limitation to only part of the house, and some other rules like, hey, don't drink before dinner. On the way to his room, he spots the ballroom, which Marion says was built almost entirely without nails. The walls and the parquet floor are made of 6 separate hardwoods, and the silver chandelier was imported from Germany. She then tells him that there are almost 100 rooms in the house at this point. So he goes into his room. In his room, he sees a panel on the wall, which is described as a communication device. It's this little plaque-looking thing, basically, that has like a few names on it and little holes. The holes are basically attached to pipes that you whistle into, talk into, and it travels to that room. So
Pretty cool.
yeah, absolutely. As Dr. Price is getting ready for dinner, we have our first jump scare moment. He's using a little vanity mirror, and when he looks away, it keeps turning to the other side of the room, and you keep kind of expecting there to like be a ghost, but at one point he like turns it, and the ghost is actually behind the mirror, so it kind of startles you. And then after, you know, he gets his mind wrapped around it or whatever, goes back to using the mirror, it turns on itself, and we see a ghostly figure sitting on a set of drawers with stub for legs and holding a pitchfork, which was what I mentioned earlier when you were talking about CGI, because I mean that could have easily just been a makeup sort of thing and some guy sitting there.
True.
So
one thing I think is CGI though are the shots of the exterior of the Winchester house,
I
because
think that's a mini.
you think that's a what?
I think it's a mini. I think it's a display, like that they
Oh.
created a miniature version of the house.
Very well could be.
That's the feeling I got.
Okay. I got the feeling it was CGI just from the way it looked, but I mean, I guess that is one way to accomplish that without having to spend the money on CGI. What'd you say the budget was? Like 3.5?
3.5. Yeah. So the next scene takes us to dinner where the boy from earlier, Henry, is playing with some toys at the dinner table while in very fancy wear. It's revealed that Mrs. Winchester chose Dr. Price to be her assessor. And then Mrs. Winchester shows up to dinner dressed in all black with a black veil on, looking very mournful as if she is attending a funeral. It is very overboard, to say the least. Dinner is basically an anti-advertisement for the Winchester rifles, I felt.
The dinner is?
Yeah. I feel like the entire dinner was basically like Jason Clarke mentioning like, oh, hey, I hear that the Winchester arms are still the best on the market. And they're like, the best at what? Fucking killing people? So it was basically like the whole thing was just like arguing the politics of weapons.
Gotcha. Which in
I feel like
today's
a lot of the movie is.
context has a very heavy meaning, but spoiler to what I'm going to get into. One thing that I found that I thought was actually really interesting is gun guilt really didn't exist back then. And I don't mean to like blow up the whole story, but gun guilt didn't really exist back then because guns were seen as a means for survival. They were necessary and not just as like a thing that you killed people with.
Right.
Whereas I feel like kind of today that's the way they're going. So back then in the late, I guess this is the early 1900s now, but it was viewed kind of differently. So the fact that they were portraying her as having, or I guess that family as having that feeling is probably not fitting with the time. So that's just a little peek into what I'll get into later.
So after our anti-advertisement or anti-Winchester dinner, the next scene shows everybody going to bed. Dr. Price takes more laudanum to fall asleep. He has a dream about a woman named Ruby while rubbing a scar on his chest, and there's a scene of him playing with a bullet that has "Together Forever" inscribed in it. He then suddenly awakes to the bells tolling at midnight. He hears noise coming from the communications device, specifically the garden room. He turns his head to listen, and a bony finger comes out of the hole, and just as it's about to touch him, he stands up and decides to go exploring.
I'm not convinced that that's a finger. If that's a finger, that's a very narrow finger.
Well, if it's a tongue, it's a very long and wild tongue.
It could be, so it's coming from the garden room. What if it's like a branch or a thorn?
I think it was a finger. He was about to get fingered.
Right in his ear hole.
That's right. Which we know is the most pleasurable of holes. So he goes exploring. He sees Sarah Winchester pulling something out of a safe. He makes a little noise. She turns around. So then he retreats to a hideaway under the staircase, very Harry Potter style, after almost being spotted. We're then treated to our next jump scare as a figure starts crazy crawling towards him in this hideaway spot. He scrambles out of it, making even more noise than he did before, but somehow still doesn't get caught. And we cut away to the next scene, which is Henry and his mother, Marion, in bed. Henry sits up randomly and decides he's going to check under the bed. As he does, a roller skate goes flying by out of control and straight out into the hallway. So at this point, Dr. Price has made it outside. He quickly looks at the garden room, which looks very familiar to him. For some reason, he hides as workers walk by, even though like he was allowed outside. It was.
Is he?
Yeah, he's just not allowed in the area where he was previously, which is Sarah Winchester's area of the house. We then see Henry again walking with a burlap sack over his head past construction workers on the second floor. He walks up to a ledge, jumps off. Dr. Price, at this point no longer hiding, sprints over and catches Master Henry before he falls to the ground. They take off the burlap sack. Of course, he's got the whited out eyes again, and he says, "I see you," in a demonic voice before his mother comes running to his aid, which I thought was very funny that like the mom knew exactly where he was. Like, why wasn't she running upstairs after him? She was running downstairs after him. And then all of a sudden Sarah Winchester shows up, like freaked out. Like, this house is massive. I'm pretty sure that these people didn't hear all this clamor.
Okay. Fair enough.
But anyway, it's in the script. The next day, we're shown Dr. Price and Mrs. Winchester conducting the interview that Dr. Price is there to conduct. Mrs. Winchester explains that she is cursed because of all the people that have been killed by Winchester rifles. Dr. Price is afterwards confined to his quarters, and it's explained to him that Henry and Marion are also confined to their quarters for whatever reason. When he returns to his room, he discovers that his laudanum has been taken because Mrs. Winchester needs him to be clear of mind to see what will happen at the house. The next scene shows Dr. Price starting his evaluation in his room, giving the date April 16th, 1906. He postulates that she has trouble dealing with the death of her child and husband, and that may be the source of the guilt she sees as shadows or ghosts. The next day, Mrs. Winchester explains to him that she hears these spirits, that they talk to her. So then we cut to that night again. That night, Dr. Price sees the same black-clad figure in the breezeway going the opposite way. He decides to escape from his room and investigate by going out onto the roof. After getting lost in the maze of a house for a moment, he comes to a door that is left cracked just enough for him to peer in. So she wanted to be secretive, but not that secretive.
She wanted to be found.
Oh yeah, she wanted to be watched. Mrs. Winchester was a bit of a voyeur. He sees Mrs. Winchester performing automatic writing, which is the process of channeling a spirit and allowing them to write physically through you. We get another jump scare because Mrs. Winchester all of a sudden stops being channeled, and Dr. Price is watching with amazement, and then all of a sudden the ghost just pops up right in front of the crack of the door and scares him off. He retreats down a hallway and sees that there is a set of doors that have been nailed shut. The next day, Mrs. Winchester asks the doctor what it's like to die, just out of the blue, revealing that the doctor had died for 3 minutes previously. She then shows him a cabinet full of books that she explains to be extensive records on anyone that has been killed by a Winchester rifle. And keep in mind, this is like a bookcase, and these books are like yearbook size.
These are they're, I would say, thicker than yearbooks. They look like 1-inch binders.
Right.
Which I'm like,
And they have one person's name with a year on them.
yeah. Like, what are you keeping in these binders?
Right.
How
I
are
feel
you
like
finding this information?
a 1-page docket would be great, you know?
Like, just like a newspaper
a
article?
little file cabinet or something.
Yeah. But
Yeah, whatever, you know.
I was curious to see what was in these binders of
Right.
death.
So she explains that many of these souls end up at the house. We are shown the bullet that killed the doctor, which he has refurbished and now carries around. It's the bullet that is inscribed "Together Forever." Mrs. Winchester explains that instruments of death have a strong tie to the afterworld.
Did you just say that with a southern accent?
Yeah, that's a little toss-up to what happens later in the movie.
Sarah Winchester does not have a southern accent,
Except for that one scene
except for one scene.
where she goes crazy southern. It's amazing. Mrs. Winchester explains that the spirits killed by the rifle instruct her to build. They want her to build the rooms that they died in. Once the rooms are completed, the spirits can enter their world and then become peace and leave their world. So the doctor questions the butler about his experiences. The butler is not very helpful, which I really don't know why that scene was even in there. The movie was long enough. I mean, the whole scene is just like, so, have you seen any ghosts? No,
Nope.
not me. Have you heard the stories? Yeah,
Nope.
I've heard it. I'll tell it too. Okay, cool. Is there anything else you can tell me? Nope. It's like, okay, that was great.
My phone just told me it couldn't recognize my voice. That was really weird.
That's weird.
It's exactly 3 o'clock. 3 p.m.
It's the anti-witching hour. So we then see Mrs. Winchester talking to the foreman and explaining the new room and the fact that they need one of every Winchester rifle to be on display in the display cases. Dr. Price starts his interview back up, and Mrs. Winchester explains that once the rooms are built, she helps the spirits move on. And once they move on, the rooms are destroyed and they start again. Dr. Price asks if some ghosts don't act so favorably, and that's when Mrs. Winchester says that those rooms get sealed away, hence the hallway that he stumbled upon before, and those rooms are sealed with 13 nails. She then tries to solicit help from Dr. Price to put this new angry spirit to rest. Dr. Price then questions the foreman. He defends his employer and denies the doctor's request to get into the sealed garden room, stating that once a room's sealed, it's sealed. And he does have a southern accent.
Does he?
Yep.
We're in? Okay.
And he's got friendly mutton chops.
Yes, he does.
And a bowler hat.
Yes.
It is fantastic. So then Dr. Price then goes to talk to Marion, to check in on Henry and Marion. While he's talking to Marion about the Winchester curse out in the hallway, Henry disappears out the window. The next scene, we're treated to a Winchester rifle coming out of the display case. Then we see a wide-eyed Henry brandishing the rifle, pointing it at Mrs. Winchester. He shoots, missing her.
He shoots, he scores.
She crawls away. He then shoots again, misses her again. He shoots for a third time, misses her. She then looks up over a little half wall at him, and he is pointing the gun directly at her, pulls the trigger, and it misfires. Henry gets very angry with the rifle and basically just starts butt-cocking her, like just beating her with the butt of this gun. He yells, "Die!" several times before returning to his normal self. Mrs. Winchester sends everyone home except the Dr. Price, the butler, and the foreman, and the young butler.
And Marion and Henry.
Well, they're already home
Right.
because they live there.
Well, fine. So, I was just helping you with your roll call of who's left in the house.
But I thought about this thoroughly before I wrote it down.
Fair enough.
So she has the foreman seal the door of the room that Marion, Henry, and the doctor are in. She then accesses the room through a hidden door in a wardrobe that has how many hooks?
13 hooks.
That's right. Dr. Price flees at this point to make arrangements to take Henry to a hospital. Dr. Price phones Arthur Gates, then runs into the young butler. The young butler then starts explaining that Mrs. Winchester has created a great thing, and she knows what she is doing. He leads Dr. Price to a dead-end hallway before revealing himself as the evil spirit and saying, "All Winchesters must die."
Ooh.
Also a heavy makeup job at this point, so another thing that they could have got away like not doing CGI with. So at this point, very shooken, he retreats to tell Mrs. Winchester what he just saw, only to find her looking at a newspaper article with the picture of who we've come to know as the young butler. She tells him he was a corporal, Corporal Bullock, that lost 2 of his brothers in war because the Southern rifles were not as good as the Winchesters that the Yankees had. So he blamed the creators of the rifle for the death of his brothers. So therefore he went to the Winchester Arms general offices and he killed 15 people before sitting down in a chair and being killed by police. So Dr. Price, Mrs. Winchester, and the foreman go upstairs to find a replica of the general office's room where the corporal was killed. Once in the room, Mrs. Winchester senses the corporal's presence. Mrs. Winchester starts talking to the corporal, apologizing for the deaths of them all. And then Helen Mirren has her Southern experience when she is walking around talking to the corporal about how he doesn't have to be evil. And then she says, "A violence is no means of justice." And then she goes straight back to her like normal accent. It is the violence is no means of justice.
Do you think she was like channeling the corporal?
I don't know. Maybe that's what they were trying to get at, but like it was the only time that she did it. Like if she had done it several other times during the conversation, it may have been.
And if that's what she was doing, it wasn't very obvious.
Right. And why, if she was channeling him, would he say violence is no means of justice?
Exactly.
When that's exactly what he was trying to exact. So anyway, in another room, Henry starts singing the song that the corporal was singing when he was killed. The house starts to shake and tear apart at this point. The foreman is dragged away by an invisible entity and gets killed by falling debris. Aww. No more friendly mutton chops. Dr. Price is then dragged away by an invisible entity, but he doesn't get killed. He just gets separated from Mrs. Winchester. While he's trying to get back to her, he comes across the hall with the sealed doors, and the nails are removing themselves from the doors. Oh, so much for the 13 nails keeping them safe. Mm-hmm. Marianne, at this point, lights a lamp to go look for Henry and stumbles across the dead body of the butler that has been heavily maimed by falling debris. Dr. Price runs into a ghost before seeing a call button for the garden room, so he decides to go find the garden room. So when Dr. Price gets to the garden room, he pries it open, walks inside, and realizes that it looks identical to the garden room that he has at his house that we saw in the beginning of the movie. At this point, the ghost of his wife appears, the lady named Ruby from the dream earlier, and starts to talk to him. It's revealed that she shot him accidentally when he tried to stop her from committing suicide, and then she committed suicide anyway. So then at this point, Dr. Price awakens and sees he's surrounded by ghosts. And I guess we can just assume that these are the ghosts that were in the rooms that were the unfavorable ghosts. However, they act pleasantly towards him. They open the door for him. They provide him with a hatchet, which he then uses to break into the room that Mrs. Winchester is in. Mm-hmm. So he finds Mrs. Winchester completely dressed in black again with the veil. I didn't know it was dinner time. Marion continues to search for Henry, who continues to sing his creepy-ass song. Marion is then led by a roller skate downstairs into the basement, which is a very interesting scene. Just seeing the roller skate navigate stairs in this very slow, creepy way. She then finds Henry standing wide-eyed next to the furnace, which we've learned is such a good thing. Meanwhile, upstairs, Mrs. Winchester invokes the corporal spirit to come and face her. She then gets possessed by the corporal as he leaves Henry. The bell tolls midnight, which tells us the corporal is at his strongest. The corporal appears and starts kicking Helen Mirren's ass.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. I thought it was pretty funny because Helen Mirren says something along the lines of, "You will not hurt my family," and then he slams her against a bookcase. So meanwhile, downstairs, Marion and Henry are being surrounded by the ghosts that have been trapped in the house. They are Winchesters, so these ghosts are not happy with them. Back upstairs, Mrs. Winchester and Dr. Price come to the conclusion that the doctor's refurbished bullet is the only thing that can destroy the corporal. So Dr. Price puts it in the gun. There's a long standoff shot, and then Dr. Price shoots the corporal just as the ghosts are about to reach Henry and Marion, saving everybody.
I have such an issue with the fact that it's the refurbished bullet that has nothing to do with this ghost is what kills the ghost.
Which is funny. It's because the shell that the bullet is in was the shell that the bullet that killed him was in. If you know anything about bullets, the shell is the part that gets expended because it's just holding everything. So it's kind of funny, yeah, that the shell of the bullet that killed him that has been repacked is what kills the ghost. It doesn't make any damn sense.
Right? And at first Helen Mirren was like, oh, he's afraid of the gun that killed him. And I'm like, that makes so much sense. Like,
right. Well, they still use that gun.
They still use that gun, but that's not what killed him.
Right. And I also thought it was funny that after he shoots him and they walk over on the like dead body of a ghost, Helen Mirren's like, he's at peace now. Like, no, he's fucking dead. Like, really? Like, if somebody falls off of a fucking mountain range, they're like, oh, he's at peace now. Like, yeah, because he's fucking dead. So Mrs. Winchester commands the other unruly spirits to go back to their rooms. And they're like, yes, mother.
Right?
Right. All of a sudden, like, these unruly spirits are just like, oh, yeah, cool. We got you, bitch.
Right? Like, these are the ghosts that couldn't move on. These are the ghosts that are angry still. But they're like, oh.
Right.
We'll stay in the Winchester house of the family that killed us.
So all of a sudden it's daylight, even though this all seemed to happen only minutes after midnight. Everybody runs outside like they just survived the like craziest thing in the world, even though what this house was built upon was craziness. So Dr. Price completes his assessment of Mrs. Winchester and concludes that she is of sound mind and body to remain in her role. He then visits the garden room one more time before leaving back for San Francisco. As he leaves, they are taking apart the garden room and the general offices room. Mrs. Winchester reveals that she plans to continue to rebuild. And then the last scene is of Nels removing themselves from a door in the hallway, like setting up for a sequel.
Right.
That Helen Mirren and Jason Clarke, I can guarantee, will not be in.
Oh, yeah?
Would you do this movie a second time? Hell no.
I had trouble watching this movie a second time.
I watched it 3 times and I thought I was going to kill myself the last time. So then we go to pre-credit screens. Pre-post movie credit screens?
Pre-post movie credit screens.
That sounds right.
Post movie pre-credit. Is that what you just said?
Pre-credit post movie? Yeah, I just said it. Yeah. Anyway, and those screens are the 1906 San Francisco earthquake was the most destructive and deadly earthquake in American history. Sarah Winchester continued to build her home 24 hours a day, 7 days a week up until her death in 1922. And the Winchester house remains one of the most haunted mansions in North America. And that's it. That is the entirety. And I guess I never realized that like this was in 1906. The earthquake was in 1906.
Yes.
Is that why? Like, are they saying that that's why the house started falling apart at the end of the movie?
I think so. So that also was something that wasn't very clear. Like the first, because you and I had watched this after the movie first came out, just because we both like scary movies. Well, actually,
right. It seemed like an interesting movie with the story and everything.
Right.
And we were proven hella wrong.
Well, so I'll get into it when I talk about the real life timeline, but I was really excited when I saw this movie come out because of the history of the Winchester house. And I was like, how cool will it be for them to show the story of Sarah Winchester? And that wasn't the case. So going back to what you said, I think, yes, it was supposed to be the earthquake that caused all that rattling damage, but they definitely made it seem like the spirits were doing something to the house. But I don't know if that was the movie writers trying to do a little play on real events. Like,
were they trying to make it seem like the spirits created the earthquake?
I think so.
Oh, God.
I think so. Because of...
It only gets worse.
Because... Yeah, so Sarah Winchester thought that in real life, it is said that she thought that the spirits caused the earthquake because they were punishing her for spending too much money on the remodel of the house. So I think the movie writers were trying to play into that a little bit with these spirits caused this earthquake, and this earthquake was actually this major real life historical event. So... that's that. I don't know. It wasn't very clear watching the movie when it happened that it was supposed to be the earthquake, and they just kind of like addressed it in these pre-credit titles, as you as you call them.
Right.
So,
I didn't get the feeling at all that that's what was going on.
No.
I guess I've seen so many like poltergeists or haunted movies and things like that where the spirits are so entwined with the house, like they are in this movie, that they create the like physical structure to fall apart. And that's what I got from I just now reading for the third time
oh, really?
about the earthquake, put two and two together. Like that's how unobvious it was.
So actually, when you came to me with the idea for this podcast of doing true story versus Hollywood movie adaptations, this was one of the first movies I thought of because I was familiar with the backstory. And then when I saw the movie, I was like, well, that was nothing like what really happened.
Especially with it opening inspired by actual events.
Yes.
Like, okay, cool. Yeah, there's the story of the house, and then you completely adulterated it.
Playing it fast and loose with the phrase inspired by.
Highly.
So getting into it, so I'm going to talk about the real story of Sarah Winchester. I'm finding it hard researching the true story of a paranormal story because what is real? What is the true story of a paranormal story? It depends on what you believe in.
Well, I would just have to say that, you know, where there are like actual hard facts and physical evidence in crime stories, here you basically have to go off of what people have seen because that's all there is. There is no hard facts, hard evidence or anything like that.
Exactly. And so as I was doing the research for this story, there are definitely two sides to it. There's kind of the paranormal side and then the skeptic side. So I'm going to do my best to kind of represent both sides because, and I mean, part of it is that it happened so long ago. I mean, we're talking about 1900s, you know, early 1900s, late 1800s when all of this is kind of happening. So there aren't great records out there. So I'm just going to dive into it. And typically when I do the true stories of a movie, I try to stick within the constraints of the timeline of the movie. But because there is so much history that went into the background of why she went out to the West and why she started building this house, that they like glazed over in the movie. It was like 5-10 minutes in and it was just like a passing comment by the chief legal officer, and I was like, I thought the whole movie was going to be about this backstory, and he like said it in a breath what happened.
Right. I mean, I honestly, whenever I was going to make notes about this movie, I almost stopped after the beginning because I'm like, the rest is obviously highly dramatized and fictionalized.
Yeah.
It takes place in the matter of 2 weeks. You know, it's going to be hard for us to find any information that pinpoints what happened in these 2 fictionalized weeks, you know,
right,
because obviously it's not what happened in the movie. But yeah, I almost stopped with just like, oh, this is pretty much the truth of the matter right here is what this chief legal officer is presenting in a matter of like a handful of minutes.
Yep.
So anyway, carry it away, please.
So Sarah Winchester was born Sarah Lockwood Party, and in 1862 she married William Wirt Winchester. William Winchester's father, Oliver Winchester, founded the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. In 1866, Sarah and William have a baby girl named Annie, who died a few weeks after being born. She died from a condition called marasmus, which is a form of malnutrition where she was unable to process proteins and other nutrients.
Interesting. And so she died before William.
Yes.
Okay.
Literally a few weeks after being born.
Okay. So I didn't get that from the movie at all.
Exactly. Yep. Then in 1881, Sarah's husband, William, dies of tuberculosis. His father, the founder of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, had died the year before. So this basically left Sarah to inherit $2 million in 1881. If you had to guess, what do you think that is in today's dollars?
$2 million in 1881.
Yeah.
I would guess 1.6 billion.
Oh, no. Now this is going to sound so much more disappointing.
Oh, sorry.
It was $507,172,414.
That's a lot still.
So $500 million in 1881. Plus, she also inherited 50% of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, which
was going to continue making her money on top of this half.
Yeah, so this made her one of the wealthiest women in the world at the time. And she also, in addition to her $500 million, she had a daily income of $1,000 a day, which in today's dollars is roughly $25,000 a day.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's a little over $1,000 an hour.
In today's money.
Right.
And I mean, what else are you going to do with that money? Like, what would you do with all of that money? That's
Donate
crazy.
it to people.
What?
donate it to people.
Yeah.
Open up charities.
She did that. I'll get into that later. So, some point after the death of her infant daughter and her husband, Sarah consulted a spiritualist. She believed the Winchester family was cursed, and the spiritualist confirmed this. She said that, I guess the spiritualist said that the spirits of those who have died by the Winchester rifle, which included Civil War soldiers and others, were the ones who are haunting the Winchester family. The medium also said that these spirits were to blame for the death of Sarah's daughter Annie and her husband William, and that Sarah would be the next victim unless she moved west and built a house for the spirits and never stopped construction. Otherwise, they would come for her. See, I feel like that right there makes an interesting movie.
Right. I know at one point in the movie, the Arthur Gates guy says that he feels that they took advantage of her in her state. However,
took advantage how? By telling her to move to California and build this house?
That's what I'm saying. Like, it's not like the lady has stake in the construction company that she chose for this.
Right?
Yeah, I feel like if anything, she was running her away.
Yeah, so I don't know if I believe that the medium was taking advantage of Sarah Winchester, because if anything, you'd think they'd want her to stay in the area and keep coming to them.
Right. I mean, maybe having fun with, but not taking advantage of.
No. So then in 1884, Sarah purchased an unfinished 8-room farmhouse in San Jose, California, and construction begins on the Winchester mansion and would continue for the next 38 years. So one of the biggest claims of the Winchester house is that the construction took place nonstop 24 hours a day. So one of Sarah's biographers disputes this claim, saying that she often dismissed workers for months at a time to, quote, take such a rest as I might, which I basically take that to mean as, hey, this construction needs to stop so I can get some fucking sleep.
Right.
Because wouldn't that, I can't imagine nonstop construction 24 hours a day.
Oh, yeah, she had to have had a soundproof room or something.
Or, I mean, I guess maybe if the house was big enough, construction could be done at one end of the house while you sleep in the other. But,
yeah.
I mean, I think that's realistic for her to give construction crews time off. In September 1922, Sarah Winchester dies in her sleep of heart failure, and she reportedly left her will written in 13 sections, and she signed it 13 times. So I'll get into it. Sarah Winchester was kind of obsessed with the number 13. You kind of alluded to it in the movie a little bit, but I will go into more examples in a bit. So the belongings of the Winchester house were left to her niece, Marion Marriott. So Marion was a real person.
Oh, cool.
Who basically, she took what she wanted out of the house and auctioned off the rest. I don't know if Marion necessarily lived with Sarah, though. From what I've read, it kind of sounded like Sarah lived by herself in this giant house, aside from her servants. So I'm not sure if that happened in real life. Then I thought this was really interesting. In 1924, Harry Houdini, who was devoted to debunking fraudulent mediums, visited the house and dubbed it the Winchester Mystery House, which it is still known as today.
That's cool.
I know that's kind of a very brief history of Sarah Winchester. It kind of goes into she was alive and then married and had a baby who died, and then her husband died, and then she built this house, and then she died. But I mean, that's kind of what's out there for fact.
Gotcha.
That I could find on the internet. So the rest of what I want to talk about is the house itself, because the house has some pretty interesting statistics to go along with it. So the Winchester Mystery House is built up around that old farmhouse that she bought, parts of which you can still find within the Winchester house itself. The Winchester Mystery House sits on a 4.5-acre site, which is almost completely occupied by the building. The estate, back when Sarah Winchester was still alive, at one point it got up to 161 acres, which included farmland and orchards to supplement her income. Because why not? As if she wasn't making enough money. Construction on the house began in 1884 and it continued until her death in 1922. And it is said that construction continued up until the minute that crews heard that she had died. And then they immediately stopped what they were doing. And they say you can still find that nails are halfway pounded into the walls where they just stopped nailing in because they heard that she had died.
That's crazy.
That's crazy, yeah. So before the 1906 earthquake, which as we mentioned is kind of depicted in the movie. The house reached 7 stories. It had an observation tower, but that collapsed during the earthquake, and now the house is only 4 stories. And the house is built on a floating foundation, which means that it's not directly attached to the brick foundation. So they believe that it's that floating foundation which saved the house from falling down completely during the earthquake.
Wow.
Yeah. So here are some stats about the house itself. It is currently 24,000 square feet.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's
a lot.
That's a small apartment.
There are roughly 161 rooms currently. It is said that servants had to walk around with maps in order to avoid getting lost.
I believe it.
Right? And it's said that you can walk into one room and then never walk into it again because you just wouldn't be able to find it ever again.
That's fucking crazy.
And what's also kind of awesome and crazy is that they're still finding new rooms in the house today. The most recently discovered room was in 2017.
It's like architectural spelunking.
It kind of is. It's really cool. I kind of want to go explore. But as I kind of alluded to in the movie, so since she had to keep doing construction nonstop on this house, she was constantly building rooms and tearing them down. And it is believed that there were a total of anywhere between 500 and 600 rooms that were built and demolished over the 38 years of construction.
Did it say anywhere whether she was the one designing them?
It is said that she was the one designing them. There was also what is called the blue room in the house, which they believe was the seance room, where she would conduct nightly seances and the spirits would tell her what rooms to build next. That was pretty cool. Let's see. This house has 40 bedrooms, 13 bathrooms, 6 kitchens, 2 ballrooms, 1 finished, 1 unfinished, 47 fireplaces with evidence of 2 others, 2 basements, which I don't know what they mean by 2 basements. I don't know.
Was there a basement and a sub basement, or was it
That's what I'm
just
saying.
2 basements under 2 different parts of the house?
I don't know if they're side by side or one on top of the other. I don't know, but there were 2 basements, 3 elevators, 2,000 doors, and 10,000 window panes. There was also a gas manufacturing facility on the property that powered the house.
Holy shit.
Because it was that big. So Sarah's 13-section will did not mention anything about the house, like who it would go to or anything like that. And at the time of her death, an appraiser deemed it was worthless due to the damage from the earthquake and the unfinished design and impractical nature of its construction, which is kind of crazy. Like this 24,000 square foot house has no value.
Right? I mean, so does a work of art. I'm sure it'd be worth plenty.
Right? So,
But I mean, obviously it became a national historic marker.
yes, it is on the it's a national historical landmark. A local investor did buy the house right after Sarah died. They bought it for $135,000.
Wow. Talk about lucky snatching. Well, that was also in the 20s, right?
Right. Yeah, that was in the 20s. And I mean, for what went into the house, I feel like they got a really good deal on it. So the first tourists walked through the Winchester Mystery House in February 1923, which was 5 months after Sarah Winchester died.
Holy crap. They turned that quick.
Right? Isn't that crazy? It's like, come on, guys, the body's not even cold yet.
So we're like 5 years away from it hitting its 100-year tourism anniversary.
Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy.
Crazy. The house is located at 525 South Winchester Boulevard in San Jose, California. And if you can't visit the house and want to see what it looks like from the exterior, I highly recommend that you play with Google Street View. I was doing this a little bit. And you can kind of walk through the grounds of the Winchester Mystery House.
And follow random people like we were.
It's still really cool to kind of like, technology. You can walk the grounds of the Winchester Mystery House and look at it. It's kind of cool. So, 525 South Winchester Boulevard, San Jose, California. So, as we mentioned before, Sarah was kind of obsessed with the number 13. You can find this window pane on the internet. It's really pretty. It's a window pane with a spiderweb design, but that spiderweb design featured 13 colored stones in it. There were 13 palm trees in the driveway. As you mentioned, there were 13 coat hooks in the seance room where she hung her 13 different colored robes for the seances. Her chandeliers had 13 gas jet lights in them. Windows often had 13 panes in them. There were 13 steps in many of the stairways. There were 13 holes in the sink drain covers, which I thought was really good attention to detail.
Right.
So I mentioned that there were 13 bathrooms, and in the 13th bathroom, there were 13 windows, and in the room leading into the 13th bathroom, there were 13 wall panels and 13 steps that led to the 13th bathroom. So yeah, that's her obsession with the number 13. It's everywhere around the house. So you were talking about the grand ballroom during the movie, how Marion Marriott kind of took Eric Price on the tour and was talking about this grand ballroom. And that, as far as I can tell, those things that she was saying about the ballroom were true. That ballroom was built with no nails. It had a beautiful parquet flooring with 6 different woods. They were mahogany, rosewood, teak, maple, oak, and white ash. Something else that I wanted to talk about that you mentioned was the fact that Sarah Winchester wore all black all the time and had a veil on. And there are reports that that was true. And she pretty much, after losing her daughter and husband, people reported that she wore all black pretty much all the time because she was like constantly in this state of mourning. There was also a rumor that she wore a veil, and if any of her servants caught her without the veil on, or like if they saw her face, that she fired them. But I don't know if that's true, because I've also heard other reports, and like more numerous sources have said that she treated her servants like very well and treated them like family. So I don't know if she would fire them over seeing her face without a veil on, but apparently she was known for wearing all black and wearing a veil. So I guess whether you believe in ghosts or not, or whether you believe in everything that you hear about this story, if Sarah Winchester believed that spirits were haunting her, she definitely did things that supported that. So some of the things that she did that kind of support the fact that she believed that she was being haunted is that she slept in different bedrooms each night to try to confuse the spirits. The house is known for having a maze of hallways, stairs that lead nowhere, and doors that open into walls, also done to confuse the spirits. It is said that there were only 3 mirrors in the whole house, and it's said that spirits hate mirrors because their reflections make them disappear. So Sarah kind of wanted to accommodate them. So her servants either had to carry pocket mirrors around with them or just do without using a mirror.
Wow.
She had many different sources of light, including gas jets and countless candles. And it said that since spirits cannot cast shadows, that shadows make them uncomfortable. So she wanted to eliminate shadows as much as possible. It is said that there were a number of trap doors and secret passageways so that Sarah could confuse the ghosts, which kind of makes me think of like a Miss Pac-Man scenario, like her running around and trying to outrun the ghosts using like secret passageways. Anyway, also something that I think is really interesting, Sarah Winchester enjoyed wine and liqueurs, but ordered her fully stocked wine cellar to be sealed off when she found a black handprint on the wall. So it's likely that the handprint was probably just left by a worker, but it was enough to scare Sarah into sealing off the room. And to this day, that wine cellar has not been found.
That's crazy.
I can only imagine, like, with the amount of money she had to spend,
Right?
what kind of wines would be in there.
That's insane.
Now, on the other side of the coin, if you're kind of more skeptic, there are some biographers of Sarah Winchester who kind of take this more skeptic standpoint. They think that there are more logical reasons behind the Winchester Mystery House. So one of them being that the doors and staircases that lead to nowhere are merely a result of the 1906 earthquake that had just never been repaired. So basically she was sealing off parts of the house that hadn't been completed or that were damaged. And that explains why some staircases seem to lead into the ceiling while they were just sealed off, or if doors opened into a wall while it was just sealed off after the earthquake. The reason why she had so many different rooms in the house was to reflect her interest in architecture and interior design, because she grew up in a family of woodworkers, so she was naturally inclined to be more interested in those sorts of things. So that explains, she just kind of had all these different rooms to show off different design styles. So I got into a little bit earlier how there was very little evidence to support Sarah Winchester's supposed gun guilt or gun grief at the time, because people saw them as a necessary means of survival. And I also thought it was interesting that this movie revolved around a ghost from the Civil War, because Winchester rifles weren't really used during the Civil War a lot. And that's because they were, the whole repeating rifle was still a new technology at the time, and it wasn't really trusted, and so they weren't going to send their soldiers into the battlefield with this new technology that hadn't really been tested yet. So it wasn't really until after the Civil War that these Winchester repeating rifles became popular with civilians after the war. So I just thought it was really interesting that that's what they focused the story on. There's really not a lot of evidence to support that the guns would have been widely used during the Civil War.
That's crazy.
So one of Sarah Winchester's biographers also claims that Sarah didn't even live in the house for the last 15 years of her life. And I have seen more than one source say that after the 1906 earthquake, she actually moved out of the Winchester Mystery House and into a nearby property that she owned. But I'm also kind of confused because reports also say that she died in the house then.
Right.
And even though she didn't live in the house, construction still continued though.
Which is weird.
Right? But I mean, maybe it was still a way of her. I don't know. Yeah, that's kind of weird. Another biographer said that when he visited the Winchester Mystery House, he was told by a tour guide that early tour guides were told to make up stories to make the house seem more enticing. So then it comes to what can you trust from what has come out of the stories of the tour guides, what's real and what's
right, because all we have to go off of are stories, and if some were fabricated, then it kind of dilutes the credibility of the other stories.
Yeah. So it's just kind of interesting. And after Sarah Winchester died, none of the servants really opened up and spoke out about what happened in the house. And some people say it's because she treated the servants so well, that she treated them like family, that they weren't like speaking out against her.
They felt like obligated to honor.
Yeah, exactly. But other people say maybe it's because there was nothing to talk about. There were no paranormal happenings in the house.
Maybe their way of honoring her is by remaining silent.
Right.
Because nothing happened, but they don't want to make her seem even more crazy.
Exactly. So there's also speculation into the motive for her building the house. Obviously, the popular motive that people like to talk about is that she was building the house as a way to ward off spirits from killing her. But the other side of the story is that she did it to distract herself from the grief of losing her husband and infant child. And she had unlimited funds, so it was kind of a hobby of hers to kind of distract her from the grief of losing.
Which seems more likely. And in the movie, it was because she wanted to house the spirits and basically get them to forgive her and move on to the ether.
Yeah. But if you go tour the Winchester Mystery House today, there are people who insist that the house itself is haunted. You'll hear stories of chill spots or tour guides hearing their names called down the hallway when there's no one there. One tour guide claimed that she fell down some stairs and she felt something grab her arm and say, "Are you okay?" And there was no one there.
Nice.
So
see, nice ghosts, though.
Exactly, nice ghosts. But so people go and they claim that the house is haunted, and then they're your skeptics. So
well, there always will be when it comes to supernatural stuff.
Yeah. So one thing I do want to finish up with, aside from building this beautiful, massive house, this isn't all that Sarah Winchester spent her money on. While she lived in the area, many local charities and orphanages received anonymous donations during this time that many people believe came from Sarah Winchester because she had the money.
Good.
She often welcomed local children to play in the gardens on the grounds, and she even offered them ice cream and to let them play her piano. She paid her servants $3 a day when the going rate was $1.50.
Wow.
And she took good care of her staff, fed them well, treated them like family. And she reportedly housed unmarried workers on her grounds or found them housing nearby. Some people believe that since she took such good care of her staff that none of them spoke out about what happened in the house, even after her death, like I said before. And she left, after she died, she left large sums of cash for her favorite employees and left a large sum of money to the Winchester Clinic of the General Hospital Society of Connecticut for the care and treatment of tuberculosis patients, which, if you remember, her husband died from tuberculosis. So maybe a crazy, crazy heiress, but also I think she did some good with her money.
Well, good.
Yeah. So my take on the movie, it's definitely loosely inspired by true events. Loosely. I think the writers of the movie were going for definitely a fictionalized, like this could have happened in this Winchester house based on the things that were kind of the rumors that were spread around at the time.
I did read somewhere that they were actually allowed to film inside the house for part of the movie.
Oh, really?
I don't know
Actually,
which part
inside?
of it. Yeah, I don't know which part of it was, but I don't know. My take on it is that the majority of what we learn is basically just the stats of the house and the stats of what she did. Mm-hmm. I don't feel like any of the story, the plot line of the movie was true in any sense of the word.
No.
And I honestly don't think it was that pleasant to watch. I watched it 3 times this week just to make sure I had all the information from the movie. And the third time I watched it, I found it very, very... Actually, the second time I was falling asleep. And the third time was very, very hard to stay awake. Which brings up... we didn't do this on Carla, but I looked at Rotten Tomato just to see what the score was for this movie because of...
Ooh.
Because of how hard it was to watch the second and third time.
What it get?
The Rotten Tomato score for it is 14. The audience score is 36, which I mean, either way,
still
it
really
is
bad.
so bad. Another reason I'd say if they do a sequel, it will not have Helen Mirren or Jason Clarke in it. I feel like it will be a very like B direct to DVD movie.
That's such a... And like I said, like I was so excited when I heard it was coming out because I thought they were going to get into the backstory of her like losing her husband, losing her child, going to the medium, and like the medium's like, you have to build this house. And I thought there was so much more the movie could have been. And instead it was this fictionalized ghost story, which also there's no evidence to suggest that Sarah Winchester felt like she was being haunted by a Civil War ghost. So... Not even.
I mean, especially if, you know, the Winchester rifles weren't even popular during Civil War time, you know. I don't know. It just...
The whole time we were watching the movie, I was kind of hoping that there would be like this really cool twist. Like maybe the whole time Jason Clarke was a ghost. Because they talk about he had been shot and was dead for 3 minutes. What was resuscitated, and I was like, oh, maybe he didn't get resuscitated. Maybe like this is her channeling him as a ghost and this is the same. That would have been
so much better of a story.
Yeah, such an interesting story.
Because I mean, that was the whole thing behind her building the house was to bring these spirits in and comfort them to pass them along. And it would have made so much more sense.
Yeah, especially when she was like, oh, I selected you specifically to be my doctor, and it was like,
right.
Did you know?
But no, they tried to make like some action out of it, and it just it fell. But
yeah.
Anyway, with that said, I think we will wrap it up. We have definitely voiced that this is a highly fictionalized version of this story. Some of the stats of the house have been true. We hope you enjoyed listening to this more than we enjoyed watching the movie. Sorry, too soon. If you would like to find us, you can find us on Instagram at Drink to Fact. You can find us on Twitter at Drink to Fact, and you can find us on Facebook. Next week we will be doing Pain and Gain.
Ooh.
The story of the Sun Gym crimes. I'm just gonna say crimes because there were so many. I mean, there was like torture and kidnap and murder and blah, 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 everything.
I have no idea what this story is about. I've never seen this movie, so I'm really excited to do this.
Which also we'll let you know we're gonna flip things on its head next week, and Katie will be doing the movie, and I will be doing the true story, just to mix things up a little bit. So stay tuned. We've got many, many more to come, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.